Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the ST Lee Distinguished Annual Lecture. I'm Kanti Bajpai, Vice Dean Research and Development and Director of the Center on Asia and Globalization at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And it's the great pleasure of the Center to organize this lecture series on behalf of the school. The ST Lee Lectures are funded by the late businessman and philanthropist, Dr. Lee Seng Tee, director of the Lee Group of Companies. Dr. Lee and the Lee Foundation support education, particularly higher education, around the world through donations towards building libraries, towards projects, and towards lecture series at major universities such as NUS. The ST Lee Lecture was established in 2010. So this is the 10th year of the lectures. We host this series as a platform for scholars and practitioners and the general public, of course, to address critical international issues. On behalf of the school, I want to take this opportunity to express my very great thanks to Dr. Lee and the Lee Foundation for their generous gift. Recent speakers in the ST Lee series have included S. Jaishankar, who was then Indian Foreign Secretary and now Indian Foreign Minister, Klaus Regling, head of the European Financial Stability Mechanism, Lord Adair Turner, former head of the UK's Financial Services Authority and its Pensions Commission, and Professor Francis Fukuyama of Stanford University, who probably doesn't need a lot of introduction. This evening's speaker is Mr. Anis Baswedan, Governor of Jakarta. I will now ask my colleague, Susanna Kadir, Vice Dean Academic Affairs, to introduce our speaker and to chair the evening's proceedings. Susanna.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker today. All of you know him, Bapak Anis Baswedan, current governor of DKI Jakarta. As someone who studies Indonesia and who has interacted with Pak Anis over the years, I was actually pleasantly surprised to learn quite a few things about him as I was preparing for this introduction. I thought I would highlight a few things. Pak Anis came from a very solid activist and intellectual background. His grandfather was a prominent Arab-Indonesian activist during the Indonesian National Revolution. His parents come with a very strong academic background. He pursued his studies at one of Indonesia's top universities, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Sorry for those of you who are coming from UI. He spent time subsequently in the United States, spending time in a favorite city of mine in the US, and that is Milwaukee, as well as going on to do his postgraduate work at the University of Maryland and his PhD in political science at Northern Illinois, where he was awarded a very prestigious fellowship. He began his career as an academic. He was appointed the youngest rector of Paramadina University in 2007. During this time, he established an NGO, Indonesia Mengajar, focused on addressing the disparity in access to quality education over the vast expanse of the Indonesian archipelago. He served in the administration of two presidents, President Bambang Susilo Yudhoyono and President Joko Widodo. He was appointed as Minister of Education during President Jokowi's term. His focus then was on alleviating the disparity in opportunities available to Indonesian students of varying socioeconomic levels. As many of you know, he became the governor of Jakarta in 2017 and has devoted his time to addressing three key issues in Jakarta. I'm sure he addresses many more, but I thought I would highlight these three. The first is sustainability in housing, environment, and infrastructure, focused particularly on creating environmentally friendly and sustainable public spaces and urban infrastructure in the very concrete city of Jakarta. For those of you who are lucky enough to get a flight into Jakarta these days, you will see firsthand the efforts at the transformation of the city. Fair access to sustainable mobility, including ramping up efforts on enhancing public transport in and around Jakarta. Thirdly, equitable work market access, including the promise to create over 200,000 medium and small and medium entrepreneurs in the city area. In 2021, Jakarta became the first city in Southeast Asia to be awarded the Sustainable Transport Award. In today's lecture, we are hoping that Pak Anies will address some of these initiatives, as well as to address the challenges that a mega city like Jakarta will continue to face into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pak Anies Baswedan.
Thank you, Professor Susana, for a very generous introduction. Professor Kanti Bajpai and all faculty members of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Mr. Ambassador, who are with us today, and all participants. It is indeed a privilege and honor for me to be here this afternoon, come back to Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and had the opportunity to share some of our works. And yes, Jakarta has many challenges. I'll share a few. But coming to Singapore is truly a break. It's really a break. Coming to a city without worrying about water, without worrying about any of the challenge. I'm as visitors, because if you're in Jakarta, you travel, and then as much as you are observing the city, you're also thinking what needs to be fixed, what needs to be developed. But here we are visiting, and you don't have to worry about anything here in Singapore. So it's good to be back in Singapore, and I'm privileged with this opportunity to share some of the things that we're doing. Let me sort of share some of the big pictures of our challenge in Jakarta. Jakarta is a city with 11 million population. So when it comes to some of the key features, we have 11 million people, and plus around 23 million in its surrounding. So a total around 35 millions. That's Jakarta greater area. And the size of Jakarta itself is only 660 kilometers square. So basically 20 by 30 kilometers square. And we contributed 17% of our national GDP. So with the larger area, it's no less than 25% of the national GDP is in that area. So it is a city that is significant to Indonesia, and many challenges that we have. If I may say so, there's 4 big issues that whenever we're doing surveys, what are things that concern most to our resident? Number 1 would be cost of living. Number 2 would be healthcare. Number 3, education, employment. These are top 4 issues that our populations has always responding whenever there is a survey. And unfortunately, flood is never on the top list. Or fortunately, there is a global challenge that city like us is facing. 1, we're talking about climate change. And then 2, we're talking about, a more livable city. And this is sort of issues across the globe. We're talking about how can we make our city more livable? Because more and more people are living in the urban area. As of today, in Indonesia, we have around 56% of our population living in the urban area. And it is projected that by 2050, 75% of Indonesians will be living in the urban area. So we have these big challenges. And then those 4 challenges that I mentioned earlier. Surveys to our residents have come up with 4 issues. 1 is living costs. 2 is about health. 3 is about education. And 4 is about employment. So when it comes to living costs, what are the structure here? 1 is food, 2 is housing, 3 is mobility. These are components that are so critical when it comes to cost of living. When it comes to health, we're talking about coverage or insurance. And then education and employment. I'll talk about all of that. I'll address this first issue first. Because if you talk to people in Jakarta, what will be the most pressing issue? Everybody will talk about cost of living. That's number 1. And then on the first issue is food. We imported food from outside. So 99.9% of food available in the household of Jakartans are coming from outside the city. So ensuring food supplies is truly extremely critical to us. So when I was asked, Pak Anies, what is in your mind every day in the morning when you wake up as a governor? Then my reply would be, is the food price change? Not flood, not traffic. It's been there for years. But this is one factor that if it change, if it increase, it's not only affecting Jakartans, but across Indonesia. The inflations that Jakarta can contribute is significant. So on this, we organize, we're talking about policies. Our approach is to divide between supply and demand. On the supply side, we had state-owned enterprises to manage supply of food. And then we have our bureaucrats in the departments to measure demands and to sort of extrapolate, project demands. In the past, these two, the bureaucrats and the state enterprise, were working together. Some were working on the supply side, some were working on the demand side. Since 2018, we divided into the two. The state-owned enterprises focus on supply, and the departments is focusing on demand. And none is working on the same issue. For example, when the company here, talking about supply, they form collaborations with certain region in Indonesia to produce rice, for example. In the past, that kind of collaborations are happening between our company and our Department of Food. And because of that, there is mismanagement issues. So that's two. And then number 2 is to make sure that food market is efficient. And to do that, we have an application called IPJ, Index Pangan Jakarta. So if any of you had the opportunity, download that application. It's called Index IPJ, Info Pangan Jakarta. And on that application, this is the applications, you will be able to see all commodities and the price change at real time. Why do we need this? This is in order to create a symmetric information within the market. That is how government intervene, not by subsidies, but by creating efficient market. So what price is reflected here? It's a wholesaler market, Pasar Induk Ramadjati. Pasar Induk Ramadjati is where all agricultural product is coming to Jakarta. It'll come to this one big market. By knowing the price there, we know exactly the difference between Pasar Induk and the retail store, the warung in the kampung. And by having this information transparent, we're able to create a more efficient market for food. So we rely on market, but government intervene by providing this and ensuring there is time in which we need to intervene. When we need to intervene, we're intervening at the wholesaler market so that the supply is stable. So that's one. 2, housing. On housing, there's 2 things here. There's not enough space there, so I'll use this here. I divided into 2 issues here. With regard to housing, there is home seeker, house seeker, those who wanted to have a house, and those who already have homes. we have two different policy here. Why I divide into two? Jakarta is the only area in Indonesia in which price of land were increasing significantly, and sometimes exponential level. So the price of land is truly increasing. Why? Because there is limited land, and prices keep going up. And one of the driver for that increase of price is our property tax. So government is very effective in increasing price of land in Indonesia, in Jakarta, by introducing policies that, from our perspective, we'd like to increase our revenue from tax by giving property tax much higher rate. But on the other hand, it has effect on people that the price of land increasing, many unable to pay the tax. So for this, the tax policy we introduced to ensure that they're able to stay where they are. On house seekers, for the one with purchasing power that is high, and those in the middle, and then those who are low income. The approach are different. For those with high purchasing power, we let the market to operate. You know, you have this advertisement of new houses, new flats, new dormitory and things like that. That's through the market mechanisms. But those in the middle and the low income, they have difficulties entering the market and getting home. So on this area, we created a project. It's called Zero Down Payment Project. This is for those who are earning from minimum wage up to 15 million. Minimum wage is 4.6 million rupiah, which is in dollars, 400 Singapore dollars, up to 15 millions. 15 millions would be 1,500. So that's the range. Those who are making that level of monthly income, they are able to engage on a mortgage, on payment, monthly payment, but most of the time they didn't have the money for down payment. So we created a zero down payment project. So you don't have to pay the zero down payment, but the monthly installment they'll be able to do. That's for the second. And then for the low income is rental flat. And in the past 5 years, we built all of this. We built around 33 towers to help facilitate this segment of our society. And then the last one is for the homeowners of Jakarta. We have been seeing migrations on a regular basis and rather structural. Those who used to live in the middle relocating outside the city and selling their lands, many of them because they're unable to afford the property tax. If any of you were monitoring news from Indonesia, about a few weeks ago, there is a phenomenon called Citayam Fashion Week. Citayam Fashion Week, with the youth were coming. And we did it. We researched a little bit further. Many of these teenagers were there. Their childhood were in the neighborhood. Their parents were relocating to Citayam area, to Depok area, to outside the city. So when they're going back to their area, it's actually they're going back to their old neighborhood because they used to live around that area. So the story behind the lesson behind this is that if we are allowing property tax to continue rising in Jakarta, we will be basically punishing the old residents who live in the strategic area for decades, for generations, because they're no longer able to afford a property tax in that area. So our approach is that then we provided a tax break for anyone that own homes below 2 billion rupiah. The property tax is zero. Above that, then property tax being introduced. So that's on the housings. Now on the mobility. On the mobility, let me give you an illustrations. the challenge. I'll talk further about this. We have 11 million people and we have 13 million motorized vehicles. So we have more motors than people. So on mobility, we are facing quite a serious challenge. 4 million people are commuting daily, 3.5 million cars, 16 million motorcycles in an area that is so small. So mobility is an issue. That's why we have traffic congestion and sometimes it's a gridlock. And we need to do something about it. So our approach on this is we look at the ecosystem. So we have a lot of public transport operating in our city. And then this is passengers. And government here, we are sort of a regulator. And we're doing enforcement of minimum service requirement. So these are operators of our public transport. We have no less than 25 operators. Mikrolet, Metro Mini, Kopaja, and all those brands that, you remember all those names. And they are operating individually. And then you have passengers here, and they have transaction every day. So when I came to office, I said, there's no way we can improve our public transport if we do not adopt one word. It's called integration. We need to integrate this into a single system. Because this is operating on its own. How do we work on that? So all these operators, I called them for a meeting. It was early 2018. And I invited them for this meeting. I said, we would like to have an integrated public transport, and it's called Jaklingko, and we would like to work together with you. I must say it was the most heated meeting I ever attended. Oh boy, yes, indeed. All the operators and the management of that, they're coming to us, and they're well, sir, thank you for the invite. This is first time we're invited. And two, they're extremely upset to us. Why? Because we are operators, and we are also regulators, and we're not being fair. On the one hand, we have Jakarta, that is our company. On the other hand, we're a regulator that set the standards and set the routes and everything. So they're suffering because of that system. So I told them we would like to work together, and we would like to create a system that is fair, and an ecosystem that is fair. And finally, the meeting was over, and they're willing to work together. And this is the plan that we presented to them. So all these operators, you're no longer receiving payment from passengers. Okay? All is gone. So this is the government part. We will be your off-taker. We'll pay your service. And we'll pay your service per kilometers. And every day you have to go through the routes that is designated to them. It's about 100 kilometers per day, plus minus 10 kilometers. That's tolerated. And then we're going to pay you by kilometers. Okay? On the other hand, with the passengers, they're paying to us 10,000 rupiah. It used to be 5,000 rupiah, 10,000 rupiah for 3 hours ride. So you can take a microbus at 7 o'clock in the morning. You can transfer to any public transport until 10 o'clock and no additional pay, and you can transfer anywhere. So we integrated the routes, we integrated the payment system, and we integrate the management in a way, because all of them operate under Jakarta. And with that approach, we are able to see some changes. Number one, the microbuses in Jakarta who are operating under this scheme, they're no longer doing ngetem. Ngetem is waiting for passengers, because they're not being paid by numbers of passengers, Number two, there is no longer routes. There is, in bahasa Indonesia, it's called rute basah and rute kering. Wet routes and dry routes. Dry routes meaning no passengers there, because they're no longer worried about how many passengers were riding, because they will be paid based on the kilometers. And then on top of that, they can have a contract with us, and they can go to the bank and renew the fleets. So today, if you come to Jakarta, try to find the old Metro Mini. If you can find one, I'll take you for dinner. Because the old Metro Mini is gone. Not that we put a restriction, but because they have contract with us, they're able to renew and get a better fleet for their own. It's an ecosystem that is being fixed, not only about fixing the, let's say, the routes being extended and everything. And then on top of that, the passengers. And with that approach, we're able to double our coverage. We used to cover Jakarta for about 42% of Jakarta was covered. And in 3 years, it increased to 82%. Now it's 90% of area in Jakarta was covered by public transport. But in order to meet this agreement, it takes 88 meetings and 6 months of negotiations with all these operators. And these operators were very outspoken. These are not groups that is, these groups are very outspoken. And 88 meetings, and we agreed on that system. And then on top of that, we're talking about increase of ridership. Let me show you some of the data on that. From around 350,000 to 1 million per day in terms of ridership. So I often said, if we double the fleet, it means we have the fiscal power to increase the number of buses. But if we increase ridership, it means there is a change in the behavior of the public. And what we are seeing here is a change. And you saw the number earlier, that the daily commuter is about 4 million. So our target was reaching 4 million by 2030. Not by next year, but 2030. So the trajectory is we are into that directions. We are seeing positive trends on this. However, it needs to continue. It must not stop there. Same thing with the annual ridership too. So, and this is the area that used to be covered. It used to be around 42% of Jakarta covered by public transport. When this data was made, it was in 2021, it was 82%. Now we're covered 90%. And with that, mobility issue that we talk about here is handled. Why? Because family spending on mobility can take up to 30% of family spending for mobility. And our target is to reduce this to 8%. This is even higher when we have increase in fuel prices like past few weeks. By having public transport in the city, we can absorb the shock because the public can take public transport and don't have to worry about the change in fuel prices. But if you're not relying on public transport, then you're heavily affected by the change in fuel prices. And I think this should be the pattern that cities across Indonesia are taking. Building, developing public transport. We have not done so for so many decades. Our approach is this. When it comes to mobility, it's your own business. We build the road, you decide what kind of vehicles you'll have. You may have cars, you may have motorcycles, but that's your decision. The state provide no public mobility when it comes to inner city mobility, and that needs to stop. And that's what Jakarta has been doing in the past few years, is by integrating that and saying public transport is no longer, quote, a delegated authority to the household, but we take it over. We will be taking responsibility on people's mobility within the city. And there is a higher purpose more than this, more than about traffic jams and simply transportation issue. We are addressing this challenge, climate change, immediately. Why? Of course, it's obvious. When we take public transport, then less usage of private vehicles, then we are seeing less greenhouse gas emission. And in fact, we are seeing a good statistic on that. We have targeted 30% reductions of greenhouse gas emissions in our city by 2030. And now we are in 2022, 8 years to go, and we have achieved 26%. So we are ahead of our target, and we'd like to continue on that. So we address that issue. Number two is we're talking about a city from the environment point of view, which is healthier, but also a society that feel a sense of unity, sense of togetherness. You know, if any of you have spent time in Jakarta and contemplate a little bit, our city is actually a somewhat segregated cities, where there is kampung, packed, crowded, hot, humid, and then you have complex, in which, area in which nice housing were there, and then you have main business districts with nice offices, and then next to it you have slum area. So there is that segregation without us realizing, and it's naturally evolved. So, as someone who took this responsibility, I thought we need to address this problem. We should not let this problem continue, but the way to address it is not in a traditional way. So our approach in addressing this issue is by creating this public transport. And when public transport were operating, it is a facility that creates equal treatment. You may be CEO, you may be a governor, you may be a mayor. When you enter an MRT, when you enter a bus, you will stand on the same line. You will sit on the same chair, you will stand on the same car, and there is no business lounge, there is no business class, it's all equal. And in a city like Jakarta, that is a rare experience. Even when you go to malls, many of you know Bundaran HI area. There are 3 malls in Bundaran HI. One is Plaza Indonesia, the second is Grand Indonesia, and the third, any of you knows the third malls? Tamrin City, right. Tamrin City. Yes, there is EX2, north of it. So those who come to Tamrin City did not dare to enter Plaza Indonesia. And the same thing, those who come to Plaza Indonesia didn't even look at Tamrin City. This is a completely different segment of our society. What we like to do is to create space that give a feeling of equality, that create a feeling of unity. And that's why we built many what we call third space. Let me wipe this. So third space, in the case of Jakarta, was this. First space is at home, second space is at work, and the third space is our common space. This is the space. And in the past, this has been mostly provided by private sectors. And when private sectors create third space, they have to create a certain market targeting. They could not create just for anyone. And that's why we're doing reforms, public transport, 2 parks, 3 sidewalks, that all were developed because we would like to build a third space that unite, a space that create a feeling of equality to all. We're talking about public transport, and then we build public parks, no less than 370 public parks, 29 urban forests, and the idea is to make sure that our population is able to find a third space that creates the feeling of equality. Even on pedestrian may look nothing new for you in Singapore, but in Jakarta, for example, we didn't have sidewalk for so many years. We didn't have sidewalks for so many years. And I remember when I come to office, I had gathering with all our staff. We have a meeting on this and on transportation, and I asked a simple questions. What kind of transportation tools that everyone has? And the answer was motorcycles. And I said, no, it's your food. Our food is our number one transportation tools. And if we in government assume that transportation tools has to be with wheels, then we only build road. We don't build sidewalks. So we build sidewalks. And when we started building sidewalks, of course the reaction was quite strong because you're taking up space for cars. Jalan Sudirman was the most obvious, but we didn't develop only in Jalan Sudirman. No less than, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, it was around 240 kilometers of sidewalks across the city. 241 kilometers, to be exact, of sidewalks across the city, bike lanes. So we try to sort of shift the paradigm that in a city, we need to have public transport, we need to have sidewalks, we need to have bicycle lanes in a modern city settings. So that has been our approach. Anyway, I went quite lengthy on the issue of mobility because this is one of the most pressing issue in Jakarta. Now, education, I'm not going to go too far on this, but what we did was enrollment system was reformed. So now we are seeing our schools having more diverse students. What I mean by diverse is this. In the past, many of our schools, especially those who are being suggested by the general public as good schools, were only enrolling or accepting students from the privileged families. Now, everyone has equal opportunity. That's on the enrollment part. But this, we will not be able to see the result in the next 2 to 3 years. The result will be in the next decades when we started to see them moving up the ladder in the socio-economic ladder. And then on health, it used to be around 73% of Jakartans covered by health insurance. Now it's 99%. It's about commitment. Our approach is this. Anyone come to hospital, they didn't have insurance, immediately you're covered if you have Jakarta ID. So we are registering everyone. And we required Lurah. Lurah is the head of sub-districts. Okay? They have to make sure that all the residents within their area were 100% covered by health insurance. If we found anyone not covered, their performance report will be marked. And if it is marked, your pay will be reduced. So they're working very hard to make sure that their population is fully covered. And with that, we're able to cover 99%. Why it's not 100%? This is what happened. So many people who used to live in Jakarta were relocating to outside the city. They did not want to give away their KTP. So if you use Jakarta KTP, you move to Depok, you still want to keep Jakarta KTP, for whatever reason that is. And because of that, they are always disturbing our statistics, in a way. Is any of you keeping Jakarta ID? Yeah, because so many are having that. And then the last on employment, our approach is helping small businesses, micro businesses, to have access to market. And we have a program called Jakpreneur. But the idea is linking them to the market, assisting them with financing, with management training, with mentoring, so that they can grow. And we're grateful that we have grown micro businesses up to the number of around 380,000 in the past 5 years. And they are very much benefiting from the digital market that is growing in our city. We have a project of giving away IUMK. IUMK is Izin Usaha Mikro Kecil and Tax ID. So many of those household entrepreneurs, they didn't have permits, they didn't have tax ID. Because of that, they're not able to participate in this digital market. And why they could not have the permits and the tax ID? Because they're operating in a zone that, according to government, is not for business. But this is household, like you're making cookies, you're making, food for breakfast, for lunch. It's not the traditional business it used to be. So we then bypass that and saying that as long as it is micro and ultra micro, then you can operate anywhere in the city, and we give away the permits. So, and this is also because of the pandemic, we sort of waived that requirement from 58,000 to 252,000 business permits were given in the past 2 years. This is during the pandemic. Anyway, let me end here. But let me not conclude, but give an underlying issue here. We have big challenges, such as climate change. We have big challenges like making more livable cities, but we have also challenged demand for the public to address these 4 basic issues: living costs, health, education, employment. In a city that is complex like Jakarta, we cannot say we can only address 1 or 2. We have to address all. And we have to address it in ways that solving living costs is also solving climate change problem. Solving the issue of mobility is also solving the issue of unity, creating the feeling of equality. So all needs to be linked to one another. Anyway, let me end my opening here, and I'm happy to entertain any comment, questions that you have. Thank you.
Halo